Hello and welcome to the Power Within podcast. Today, I'm so excited to have my friend Scott Bishop back on. Scott, thank you so much for being here again.
Hey, Laurie, glad to be here.
So, I wanted to talk to you. You had reached out to me after the election, and you were like, "What about an episode to unpack this?" And I thought that that would be a really good idea because there's so many different perspectives and so much stuff that happened. And I know even for myself, I was kind of shocked at everything that transpired. So I want to start off talking about that. And I want to get your opinion on how you think, were you surprised with the election results? What do you think that was what the American people conveyed? And do you think going forward, like those expectations are going to be very high because people care more?
That's a huge question. I think I'm very pleased with the election results, obviously. Um, I think that the media and the left, since 2016, essentially, has been trying to, for the better lack of words, manipulate how people are to think and feel. And I think that this was a resounding slap back in their face to say that not only are the majority of Americans kind of fed up with a lot of the stuff, the DEI and all that stuff, but there's so much information available to everybody's fingertips now that I don't believe that what we would consider to be their propaganda is sticking with anybody. I think that everybody was shocked, but more as far as the people on the left. I think that people on the right or conservatives, right of center, however you want to call them, I think that a lot of people were just focused on a lot of common sense, what they deem kitchen table type situations. And you can't have the price of groceries and the cost of energy be as high and then have them tell you that everything is great and wonderful and you just don't understand because you're not educated enough to see what's happening. So
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in that, and I want to start with this. So one of the things that um, I'll be honest with you, like I knew that there was a lot of support for both sides of the party, or it seemed that way.
mhm.
When I actually saw when the election results were finished and I saw the way that the map actually looked, I mean, I was shocked. I was like, wow. I was like, I didn't think it was this much. But you just touched on some very important things. And I want to, first thing I want to start with is that one of the things that really dissuaded me from the Democrat Party is I don't have an allegiance to either side. I used to be all Democratic, and that was how I voted no matter what. And as I started to learn about the Constitution and I started to learn about different things, I'm like, I don't want to be tied to either of them. I want to be tied to what is good for the American people, what the Constitution was upheld for. So for me, I'm like,
Yes.
I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat. I'm going to vote how whichever party is there. So one of the things that I noticed that I really felt disconnected to was the when they did the Democratic National Convention, and then you watched the Republican National Convention, and I watched a lot online where people talked about this. And one of the things that I didn't like is that literally you celebrities were crammed down your throat at this
Hmm.
Democratic National Convention, and it was them telling you how to vote, them telling you what to do, and respectfully, those people are really out of touch with the problems and the things that the American people are facing. And I was like, I think that this election was a big slap back to say, you know what? We don't care what you think. You don't control how we vote. And just
Right.
because you tell us to do something, it doesn't matter. And I was watching, I actually, after the election, I watched The View
Hmm.
for an episode. And I realized why I never watched that show. I watched it years ago when it was more like a view of different perspectives. Now it's not.
Right.
And there was one of the ladies on there, and she was sitting there and she was like, you know, um, it's the curly haired lady. I can't remember her name. She was a lawyer or whatever.
Hmm.
But they were talking about the election result, and she was like, everyone who voted is a racist. And the girl's like, are you really saying all of America is a racist? And she's like, yes. And I was like, wow, this lady really is so out of touch. And then she was like, she was talking about how she was going through like the demographics of who voted for Trump. And then she was like, and then like 50 something percent of white uneducated women voted for,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, hold on a minute. First of all, if the tables were turned, that would have been a real, I mean, she probably would have been fired.
Dog whistle.
But it cracked me up because I'm like, you you're saying that the white women who voted for Trump are uneducated, which is the farthest thing from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to see like this even further, this division that was being created. And I was like, no one's listening to the people. And then the next day, one of the other girls came on and she said, I've been really giving a lot of thought and stuff. And she's like, we're not listening to people. And there was a guy who did the news after who said that too. He said, we've stopped, even as a news organization, listening to people,
Mm-hmm.
listening to what is affecting them. And they can't afford to put food on their table. They can't afford to do this. It's not that they're racist. It's not that there's this. And don't get me wrong, there's racist people on every single demographic that you can think of. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying that doesn't play a factor in it. But what I'm saying is, when you can't afford to put food on your table, when your bills are more than you make, when you're working multiple jobs and it's still not enough, people get fed up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the guys had said, my mom told me that no matter what, I think it was one of the news guys, he was talking about his mom talking about when no matter what your party is, when it gets to the point where you can't afford groceries, you will change your vote. And that's where I think we are as a society. So I want to ask you if you took in any of the news stories or anything, and what your perspective was with that, because I just shared mine, and how you think that also played a part in how people voted.
Yeah, I think that I think what you're saying is that the media and the Democrats have tried to control that narrative for such a long period of time that it is a mundane, ineffective slight to people who are supporting somebody that's not Kamala Harris and or Joe Biden, right? You're racist, you're a Nazi, you're this, you're that, you're anti-immigrant. That's one of the other big things. So it's like nobody's anti-immigrant. We're anti-illegal immigration, right? We want people. We're a nation of immigrants, and we talked about that before. And you hear about just the propaganda, and you think about the history of the country and how when the mass migration from Europe came, everybody of those people wanted to be counted. They wanted to stand up and be recognized. They wanted to work for what they had to work for. And back then, if you couldn't cut it, you got sent back, right? So that's one of the big differences. I don't care where they're from, but we want you to come here legally and stuff. And I think that was the media reaction prior to trying to control how people thought and maybe intimidate voters, right? But like you said, when it comes to, unfortunately, a lot of people are in jeopardy. Credit card defaults, can't afford the cost of energy, can't afford groceries, having to decide to put things back because whatever. That's a huge thing, and you shouldn't vote party. You should vote your conscience, what's most important for you. And I think that that's what happened. It was nothing but what's most important for the American people, and I think a lot of it is common sense.
Absolutely. And you were talking about the energy costs, and I know you and I have talked about this before, in New Hampshire, because we don't have like a lot of that competition here. My standard electric bill used to be like in the summer with all the ACs going in different things. It used to be $200.
Yeah,
Scott, my electric bills in the summer are over $600, and that's with me running around unplugging everything. And when you think about your bills going, okay, I plan for 200, it's 600.
right.
My increases at work are not going up at the rate that all this stuff is.
Correct.
And then they're saying, oh, food's only gone up this amount and this amount. No, it's not. Like, I can see huge differences of, I would go and buy, like, I love to juice. That's one of my things. I always do fresh juices. I used to be able to do my batch juicing for 60 bucks a week for, 3 different varieties of juicing, all fresh vegetables and fruits.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at over $120
Yeah.
a week now to do that when I go into the grocery store. These aren't little increases that have been happening. We're talking double and triple when with groceries, with electric. And when you're somebody who's on your own and you don't have other people to depend on, it puts you in a hole real quick, because you start going, okay, now I got to tap into my savings. No matter if I'm working, I'm someone who works, pretty much, I work 2 jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm tapping in to my savings, going, okay, well, I don't have enough from my work to pay for everything. So now I'm going to take my savings. And
Yeah.
you can only deplete your savings so much before you go, this is not sustainable.
Correct.
And that's
Correct.
where I think a lot of people, people are like, oh, work harder and do that. You only have so many hours in the day. There's only so much that you can do. And you're seeing, it's a very hard thing to see. I think some of the things that really bothered people, and this is something that bothered me, is seeing a lot of people who are losing their homes and are facing homelessness and doing all these things. They work hard. They get up every single day. They're
Mm-hmm.
struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to put food on the table. I watched a news story with a mom and her daughter who were homeless, and they were working between the two of them 3 jobs. And she's like, we work every day. We just can't afford the rent. We can't afford the bills. Like, it's not sustainable. We don't know what to do.
Right.
But then we had all these like immigrants come in, and free housing, free food stipends, free insurance,
Cell
and
phones, hotel stays,
yep,
travel, airplanes and buses and all sorts of different things.
yep.
Yeah.
And you look at that and you go, well, wait a minute. I can't afford to live, and there's no one assisting me. You saw, I was watching on the news with the tragedy in North Carolina. I think it was Asheville, that flood that
The
came in.
hurricane. Yeah.
Yep. And I was looking at people talking about how they were going to give the $500 to, the citizens, to help them. But you had to apply for it. And then there was people going in saying, well, we're getting denied. We're all getting denied, or we're only
Right.
getting $250. And you look at what we're giving out to people coming in illegally, and we're not even helping our own people.
Right.
And that's a huge problem when your
Yes.
own citizens can't even afford to live. They can't afford to keep their head above water. And this, I think, played a massive, massive part of what happened in this election, because
I
everyone can't afford to live.
I think that was a big caveat, but I also think that just the asinine telling of what to be fact versus what everybody saw, it kind of ties into how you and I reconnected. And I wanted to go back because I have a question for you.
Sure.
Um, just to recap for your audience, I know that when we had a little group out there essentially protesting the vaccine mandates, not because we didn't think that the vaccine was going to be effective or whatever, but we didn't think that it was right for the government to mandate it, right? It's not the government's role to tell us what we can and can't or should and shouldn't do with our body, right? So
Mhm.
we'll just recap way back when. So you came up to the group and I recognized you, you recognized me, and we started talking, and you had kind of sort of indicated that you had been kind of hard leaning Democrat, maybe not super left, but Democrat. And then you had an awakening, a red pill situation. You changed your view and your perspective. And I'm just curious if, I mean, I know that the Charlottesville, Virginia thing was one of those things that keeps sticking in my craw. For 4 years, they ridiculed Trump because he, quote unquote, said there were very fine people on both sides. But nobody ever recapped the very next sentence that came out of his mouth in that press conference, except for the neo Nazis and the white supremacists. Those people should be condemned completely. And for 4 years, the media never, ever, ever corrected themselves, ever got called out on it. It was just their mantra. And this is one of the things is like, so as a journalist, as somebody who's supposed to have a little bit of credibility, as a source of information, you either A, know the truth and you're lying, which is disgusting, or you don't know the truth and you're uneducated about it, And that also is ignorant and disgusting, right? You can't claim it to be one thing when everybody in the country and in the world can go online and find the truth, right? So he never once called Nazis and white supremacists very fine people. That was all a lie. But for 4 years, it never stopped anybody. Still doesn't stop them today, right? We're 8 years removed from it, and they would still talk about it as fact. And I think that there's so many scenarios we could point to, but I just want to go back to you real quick and kind of find out what did you hear and see and find for you to start thinking a little differently.
So my journey into that. So I will say I was very much. I always voted Democrat. That was just a hard line. It didn't matter if I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't even really.
You voted blue no matter who.
Yes, and I did not really educate myself on things. I would take what I saw on the news and say, okay, that's it. And I looked at that, and I used to be like, oh, the Republicans are awful human beings. They don't care about like people. They're just trying to garner their wealth, and I had this very skewed perspective, and I followed a gentleman. He's a Canadian actor. His name's Graham Wardle, and when all this stuff started happening, he started speaking out and sharing stuff. And at that point, I was still now. I wasn't vaccinated and I wasn't going to be. I could feel it in myself that I didn't want that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone, I don't do like the flu shots. It made me sick. So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, no, I'm not going to do this. But I still felt like at that point, I was like, oh, I'm going to, I'll wear the mask. I will, I'm going to protect people. I'm going to do this. And so he started sharing stuff that was like contrary to that. It was like kind of dismantling, like, you know, the perspective, the narrative that was going on. And I got really angry with him. And I was like, how dare you like put people at risk? My
Mm-hmm.
entitledness right there. How dare you share your view that's going to put someone else at risk? And how dare you share misinformation? So it made me mad. So then I started to I realized in that moment that it was important to do my own research. And I'm like, I'm going to prove him wrong. And so but here's the thing. You have to, as a person, when you want to do this or you want to educate yourself, you have to be open to say, okay, I'm going to look at different news sources and I'm going to look at different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're just going to try and prove someone wrong with your own perspective and your own, the news sources that you have, you will never understand another person's perspective. You will never understand another side that you could be open to viewing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was huge for me because I started to take in different news sources. Now, and I'll say this on both sides, your Democrat and Republican side.
Mm-hmm.
There is news sources that are not credible on both sides. And
Hard leaning, right or
yeah.
left, yeah.
And you have to be able to decipher that too. And that's an internal thing. You can feel it when you're reading something. You're like, this isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to look at the different perspectives and I was able to start to come in and go, wait, hold on. This narrative, because when you look at like the mainstream media, if you actually start like collecting and looking, you can see everyone saying the same thing. And
Mm-hmm.
there's news clips of this, like where people have shown you, and it's literally the same agenda, and there's no variance from it.
Right. Local media outlets spreading the same message, and it's verbatim, word for word. Maybe a different inflection in the tone, but word for word, it is the exact same message.
Yes.
Yes.
And I saw this and I was like, wait a minute, hold on. This seems more like an agenda. And so then I started taking different perspectives. And like I said, there's things that I read on when I started reading the other side where I'm like, this isn't right either.
Mm-hmm.
And it's being able to bring them both in collectively and try to say, okay, I am in this middle ground here.
Yes.
And I'm trying to understand this perspective and this perspective.
Yes.
What can I do to align myself in that middle perspective so that I can be educated, so that I can be informed, but I'm not swayed by this perspective and I'm not swayed by that perspective.
Yeah.
That was how I did this. And then I came to see that what he was sharing was actually the truth, and I could feel it. It was like a deep feeling going, okay, this is true and this isn't. And there's things, when he shared stuff that was wrong, he would correct himself as well. And
Sure.
that's really important, because that's another thing that I started to do when I started to look at things. If people can't admit when they're wrong and come out and say, hey,
Yeah.
I got to retract this is misinformation, you lose credibility. And so for me, I look at that, and I do believe, like, I'm not going to say that everyone on the left or everyone on the right is wrong. I believe that there are people who are collectively doing the best they can with what they have and trying to share that, because I do believe there are journalists, and I have a friend who's like that, and he talks about that, like the integrity that you have
Mm-hmm.
to not just show up and try to get the first story out and get it out wrong, but to be able to go back and correct yourself, and to be able to admit that you're wrong about something, or to do that. And that's important
Yeah.
no matter where you're at. And so that changed my whole perspective. It changed my whole outlook on everything. And it changed my whole life, in that I don't just go to mainstream media anymore. And I would tell people, don't ever just get all your news from mainstream media. In fact, I probably wouldn't get any of my news from mainstream media
No,
now.
because unfortunately, it's all skewed. Every major media outlet that you look at, like you said, I don't even think, other than Fox News, I couldn't think of another mainstream conservative media outlet. I mean, Newsmax is kind of sort of, but I mean, even the big ones, ABC, CBS, NBC, they're all skewed to a certain way. And I don't understand how, when people regurgitate those talking points, they don't understand that they're not informed completely. And,
Mhm.
ignorance is just, you don't have all the facts. And we can go back to the pandemic and we look at, the source. Everybody looked and turned to Anthony Fauci for the answers, right? Most knowledgeable individual in all of it. So I'm like, okay, we have to listen to this guy. And then not too long after things started to getting going, we're noticing that, why is this story different now than it was 2 weeks ago? Right? Masks don't do anything. Right? They maybe stop a small droplet, this and that. And we're still trying to understand the virus. Does it live on surfaces? How long can it stay in the air? All that stuff. But then when the leading world's expert tells you masks don't work, and then, oh, you have to mask, then you have to double mask, then you have to do this, and now we know that 6 feet was an arbitrary number. They just kind of said, oh, well, that kind of sounds good. There's no real science behind it. There's no real facts. Again, I think it was all an effort to, I always will still say that it was a control test, right? It was a pressure test to see how much the American people or the world is willing to take from a global government, right? We talk about it, you hear about it all the time in the news, global organizations, global government, a world economy. That's not what we should be focused on as a country. Not any other sovereign country should ever be focused on that. But there are some big players at play to make things like that happen. And I think when you see election results like we just saw, it's just, I don't want to say resistance because it kind of sounds corny, but I think people are just kind of tired of the crap, you know? And then
Yeah.
and just all the history with that COVID fiasco. The virus is so deadly that it evolves. We always heard the Delta, this, that, all these different strains. Okay, well, if we know that a third of the country, maybe better part of a third of the country, is still not vaccinated, where did the virus go? Where did it go, Laurie? Why aren't these unvaccinated people dying? It was all BS. And now you hear the stories of all hospitals being crammed full of unvaccinated. Not true. People dying of this and that. Not true. Flu deaths went away. Everything was undercounted. All this. It's just absolutely crazy. 99.999% mortality rate, and everybody's flipping out. And you think about small businesses, families, all those forced to close down because the government said, we know what's best for you. And that is so, I'm very aligned with the Constitution. And I cannot stand the fact that people basically capitulated to say, okay, government, tell me what to do, you know?
And what started to happen is you saw, and this is something that as as I've started to learn more and more about the Constitution and different things too, like um, we don't want to hand our power to the government. And I think what we saw here is that they started to push the
Mm-hmm.
boundaries just a little bit. But what
Mm-hmm.
people don't understand is once you push and they've been able to take that little bit of power away from you, and now they've moved that line, you're not getting that back.
You've slacked off, right? They
Yep.
push it to a limit, you stop, and they say, okay, that's enough, but they never let you go back, right?
Yep. And they kept slowly doing this. And I could see, I'm like, I think that a lot of Americans take for granted um, how important our freedom is, and how important the Constitution is to protect like those rights and stuff. You look at other countries and people don't have the rights and things that we do.
Mm-mm.
And so we are a very privileged country in that respect, that we have that control, we have that power, but you're slowly giving it to them, and so it's moving the needle points farther and farther. And once the government takes that, they're not giving that they're not going to say, okay, you know what, you came right up to our line, we're going to stop. They stopped for a little bit, but then
Right.
they moved that needle further, and so then they got to a resistance. Okay. And I started to see where we've slowly like let go of a lot of our things, like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our rights and things that started to happen. And I was like, I don't want to be a part of that collective who is not standing up and going, don't let this happen. Like, I think it's a beautiful thing. And I used to be like, oh God, like when I used to see people flying their flags and stuff, I'd be like, oh, like I didn't look at it from the perspective. But you literally have people, and I know every country has their own army and military and things like that, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But you have people who will lay their life on the line to protect these rights that we have. So many people have died for that.
Mm-hmm.
Respect that. And like live those values, that and be appreciative and respect those things that we have. Don't hand your power over to the government,
Right.
because I'm telling you right now, the government does not care about you. And if you can
No.
look at these events that have happened, you know look at the flooding, look at the hurricanes, look at the all these mass storms that have happened, all these different things. Has your government shown up and taken care of you? No, like they haven't. And I'm sorry, like everyone who's just lost everything, oh, your government's going to give you $500. Oh, but they're funding billions of dollars to wars and everything and giving to other people while you're suffering. They don't care about you, and
Yeah.
that's important to remember.
Not only that, but a lot of people I think are under the guise that they live under freedom. And I'll use Australia as an example. Back in the 80s, they got rid of all of their guns, right? That was, you have to have special permits, farmers most of the time, blah, blah, blah. But, and they are like, oh, we're just as free as everybody else. Okay, until COVID hit. And then if you resisted, or if you traveled outside of this particular area that they told you could travel outside of, they were locking you up. They were literally putting people in internment camps, COVID internment camps, because the government told you what to do. And how could people fight back? What if the government wanted to make a different decision and say, only people with blue eyes get to survive now, right? I mean, and we talk about fascism and all this stuff, but they really don't understand the slippery slope. I have a family member down in Maryland who is a very left leaning liberal. And we've been into this argument several times about, the Bill of Rights and, oh, why do you need this gun and why do you need that gun? And da-da-da. It's ridiculous that you need a gun. I'm like, well, you can love them all, you can dislike them all. You just can't pick and choose because they are all intertwined. And I honestly believe, like I think that you might start to believe, that as soon as you're willing to give up one, or if you're willing to give up somebody else's right, it won't be long before they come for the others. You know? And it really, and we hear it now. Moderating free speech. Now that Elon Musk has control of Twitter, everybody's losing their minds. But when Twitter was its own company before Elon Musk, and they would block misinformation or shut down dissenting voices. The left and the media was all about, well, it's fair because they're a private company. They can do whatever they like. If you don't like it, that's too bad. They're not beholden to articles of the Constitution. But now, somebody who's like, oh yeah, no, I'm all about free speech. As long as it's legal speech, it's free speech. And they don't like it. They want him to moderate it or ban it or control it, censor it, right? And those are all these little buzzwords, and you hear it even on The View, the ladies on The View. Well, I think that social media companies are out of control because there's no way to moderate the speech. Moderate what? What are you moderating? If it's not illegal, whether it be hateful or not, whether you deem it as oppressive or offensive or whatever, be offended. But that's the beauty of the First Amendment. So I can say anything I want to, and if it offends you, oh well. And if it's not offending you, okay, great. You know, like you're going to tell me that men can be women. I disagree with you, but you're going to scream it wholeheartedly. I can't moderate that speech. That's what you think. Okay, you're wrong, but okay. You know,
And no one can offend you without your permission anyway. You choose what offends you.
there you
And the
go.
problem is that in this world, if we started to allow that and say, okay, well, if this offends somebody, then it'll be removed, or if this offends somebody, we'll in Canada, you got to be careful with what you say too, because the government can arrest you if you're mean or whatever, or you spread stuff online. But the problem is with that is that everything offends somebody.
Somebody,
So
correct.
you cannot define what is offensive. And sure, you may not like it, you may not align with it. And Scott, I used to be a huge social media person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tell you right now, I think I'm so grateful that I grew up in the time that I grew up in, where people just kind of didn't have all of this, because
Mm-hmm.
I do think social media is extremely toxic.
Yes.
I think that sure, there's some great benefits to it, and I've met some wonderful people, and it has changed my perspective. But the overall picture of social media is toxic,
Mm-hmm.
and too much people are focusing their life on that instead of actually getting out in their communities and saying, let's make a difference here, let's do this, let's do that.
Or let's have a
Everyone's offended.
conversation. Yeah,
Yep.
let's have a conversation. You have a different perspective than I do. I'm willing to listen to you. You have to be willing to listen to me. You know,
Yep.
like, why do you think that way? And I've done that with my kids. I mean, when we first had our first son, our son, my wife and I had decided, we were both born and raised Catholic, but we were like, we're not going to do that to him. We're not going to force a set of beliefs on him. We're going to let him, if he seeks it out, he seeks it out. And now that they're older and they're a little bit more in tune with what's happening in society, when they make a comment or they say something and they state it as a fact, I'll always challenge. What makes you think that? Why do you think that? What information do you have that says that that's the fact and it's not just somebody's opinion? And I make them think. And, both of my kids voted. I know exactly how my daughter voted. I don't know how my son didn't. My son voted, but my daughter, my 21-year-old daughter, voted Republican, and her very best friend voted Democrat. And they knew that going into the election, and her best friend was very upset that my daughter was voting Republican, and they had to have a tough conversation about why one believed the other. And it was, I think, a huge growing experience. But I think what you said is right. Having a dialogue, interacting, trying to understand somebody's perspective. I mean, I can't convince anybody, but if you're willing to listen and give it food for thought, like your friend Graham from Canada, a Canadian, right? Provoked your thought, and you were all hell bent on proving him wrong, but you went down the rabbit hole of fact finding, and you came out a different person. So that's big. That's part of everybody's self development. So I think that if more and more people, even on social media, engage in that particular type of discourse, the world would be a better place. So,
And I think too, it's important to I do think those tough conversations are important to have. And for me, integrity's the top thing.
yeah,
Authenticity, integrity, like that's really how I'm trying to live my life. And I'm not I here's the most important thing. Everyone needs to be teachable.
Yeah.
So you're not always right, you're not always wrong, but you need to
Right.
be teachable. You need to have those conversations. And I even had, I was sharing my perspective on a solo cast that I had done, and I ended up taking it down because this wonderful, sweet woman, she was actually the last person I had on, Karen. She kind of called me out, or the way that I read her comment, and I loved it. It was such a growing opportunity for me. Is she pointed out where I was being a hypocrite
Mm-hmm.
on something that, like my perspective of something. And at the time, I didn't think that, but getting her perspective, I was like, she's right. And that's not integrity. Like, I need to correct that. I need to fix that. And I said to her, let's have a tough conversation. And that's where we need to be in the society, because if we're just all looking for echo chambers, nothing is ever going to change. If you just want to sit in your group and listen to everyone praise you and love you and like agree with you, fine. But no one's ever going to meet each other halfway. And
Yeah.
that's where we need to be in this world.
In
We
the middle.
need to be in that middle balance, because being here or being here, you're never going to have that authenticity. You're never going to have that integrity, and you're never going to have the understanding either.
Yeah. I think that a lot of that goes back to like the blanket statement. If you're a Democrat, you vote one way. If you're a Republican,
Mm-hmm.
you vote the other way. And Democrats think this way and Republicans think that way. And that's, again, one of the furthest things from the truth,
Yep.
which we'll go back to. And I want to tie in your belief or your strength in the Constitution and the Roe v. Wade / Dobbs decision. So my understanding, its perspective, is that the Dobbs ruling was based off of a Mississippi abortion clinic ruling that the state of Mississippi wanted the 15-week ban. The abortion clinic wanted to go further, and it got chased all the way up to the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court re-examined the case and the standing of Roe v. Wade and decided that it wasn't essentially protected by the Constitution because it's not specifically named in the Constitution. So it's a state's issue, and that's where they kicked it back down to, right? That is the correct ruling. Now, should states ban it? No. Should states limit it to 6 weeks? No. 6 weeks isn't enough. Not enough time. My personal belief is, unfortunately, that if a young person, a female or a young couple, gets into a situation where they're either not ready or they simply made a mistake, they make that choice. It's what's best for them. The problem I have is when it becomes a resource for birth control,
Yes.
which it's not. I mean, you have to have a little bit of morality inside of you to understand that if you are laying with a man, and apparently men are 100% responsible for all unplanned pregnancies, well, where's the accountability? Because it takes two people, right? There's a biological intent of unprotected sex, which is procreation. I was much younger and in the dating pool, and I can honestly say I've never had an unwanted pregnancy scare because I was always doing the right thing, you know? And so I think that there's a lot of that conversation that needs to be had. I've instilled that on my children, right? You guys, I'm not ignorant enough to think that you're all going to, live in a temple and marry when you're 30 and that will be the first time you ever have sex. But Jesus, please do the right thing, right? Understand how to put a condom on. Even my daughter, tough conversation, but come on, just be smart, be safe, have fun. Don't be completely irresponsible, and and then it gets to the point where what's a limit? Is there a limit? Is it 15 weeks? Is it 20 weeks? Is there some place nationally that we can come to an agreement on? Because again, my opinion is that 8-month, 9-month, full term, it's just barbaric, right? Barbaric. And there's not a single state in the union right now that has a law that goes against medical intervention if it is indeed medically necessary. They're bringing up the case in Georgia where the young lady got sepsis and died. Another one in Texas, young lady was 6 or 7 months pregnant, got sepsis and died. And it was really a situation of, you call it medical malpractice, or, she got too far. She was too sick and she passed away. It wasn't the result of an abortion ban or any laws on the books that prevented medical care, but that's how they're spinning it. So where are we as a nation? Are we just absolutely having no conscience of what we're doing? to babies, that far along. It's
I think that there's so this is such a huge topic because um I have different viewpoints on when it comes to abortion. I have different viewpoints on different things. Um I'm fine with it going back to the states. I don't agree. Like I've seen like there's I remember seeing at one point there was like some girl was like wearing like a shirt like bragging that she had like 30 abortions or something like that, and I'm like, no, that's not like, for me, birth using it as a birth control is not okay.
right.
Of course there is situations of rape, incest, there's medical things, there's, and most women that have to have an abortion, um a good percentage of them, it really affects them mentally in their life. Like it's a hard decision. It's not
Yeah.
something that they take lightly. And
Or should they?
yeah, and I do respect that. I do sometimes have a hard time, like, I will say this, I do think that there's some hypocrisy in this. This will come from the Republican Party, is the most dominant. These men will have affairs and have their mistresses have abortion, but then think
Mm-hmm.
that they have a right to try and ban it.
I agree.
And to me, that's hypocrisy at its finest. If and I truly feel, in a government situation, if you have ever been a man who has asked a woman to have an abortion, you shouldn't have any voting rights for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if your decision is trying to tell other people no and you have persuaded someone else to do that, no.
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of hypocrisy in there. And also, I think that we also, as a country, though, we have to do better because people are so, um, they have so much opinion about abortion. But once these children are born and they get put in this system, nobody cares. And so
Right.
many children fall through the system.
Yep.
They end up in human trafficking, abuse, drug situations. And so
Yeah.
we can't just look at abortion from like, for me, I don't just look at abortion from like that type of conception. Sure, I don't think, unless it's medically, I think when you're talking like the end terms of the pregnancy, unless it's something medically that's going to literally kill the mother, or there's something that goes wrong, sure,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that abortion should be used in those situations. But I also think that we need to have a real hard, long conversation on all of these unwanted children in the world and what we're going to do with them. Because that, to me, is a piece that has been left out. And you're seeing these children suffer. You see the abuse. You see, like, look at the that one from, I think, the New Hampshire case. Her father killed her, and no one cared or knew for quite a while that
Mm-hmm.
that poor little girl had been murdered by her
Mm-hmm.
father. And I'm pretty sure it is her father who murdered her.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Harmony Montgomery.
Harmony Montgomery, yep. And then you had, there was a Netflix special that I watched about Gabriel Fernandez in California. That poor child, he the abuse that child had to endure in his brief life before his parents killed him.
Mm-hmm.
We fail the children, and that's a conversation that we need to have. I think it's a huge topic. I think that, no, using abortion as a birth control, absolutely not. Like, if you can't be
Right.
responsible to use birth control or to figure out your situation, then you shouldn't even be having sex, realistically. And make sure that you understand that if you're going to have sex, there is consequences. Um, Also understand that not everyone who has to have an abortion is this evil, like, devil worshiping person, because that's not the case either. It's a
Right.
hard decision for a lot of people who have to have that.
And I think going back to what we talked about, Republicans think one way, Democrats think another way. And if you speak outside of what that alignment is, or what people believe that you should believe, I think that that's one of the big misconceptions, because I'm going to guarantee you that 76 million people, or whatever, voted for Trump. They're not all anti-abortion. I guarantee you they're pro-choice, but
Mm-hmm.
with common sense. And I'll bring up the gubernatorial race here in New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a 24-week ban, 24-week limit, and then medical exceptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really a ban. But Joyce Craig said she was going to remove the ban on abortion. So at 24 weeks of gestation, she wants to extend it to full term without any medical necessity. Hopefully at 24 weeks, if you're the unfortunate victim of rape or incest, you knew where that pregnancy was coming from and you had made a decision prior to. But where's the morality in it at 24 weeks? That's beyond viability. She was calling it an abortion ban. See, that's not the truth. That's not the facts, and it's disgusting, you know? And just like what you're saying, those hard right evangelical type, all life is sacred. Okay, well then don't knock up your mistress and force her to have an abortion, you hypocritical SOB, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that that's a conversation. One of the other things that I know for a fact, and you probably are catching on to this too, is that there are certain legislative issues that our government will never fix because they love the division, and it's a very good political tool to use when it comes election time. And I remember recently there was Pete Buttigieg, current Secretary of Transportation. He was in front of some college students, and this young lady, very well spoken, talked about how Ruth Bader Ginsburg didn't think that Roe v. Wade was the proper case law to hang abortion up on, and it should have gone back to the states. And then she brought up in 2008, 2009, for 2 years, Democrats had the mandate, and Barack Obama talked about or campaigned on codifying Roe. And then when he got into the office, he said, not my top legislative priority. So there have been many chances in the last 50 years for them to fix it. But unfortunately, we understand that they don't want it to be fixed.
This also happened this is something that I watched Kamala talk about too. Well, it's going to be when I get in the White House. Well, hold on, wait a minute. You are in the White House.
Yeah.
You're not the president, but you're the VP. If this is something, because I don't like that tactic either. And anyone who's paying attention can understand that. Don't use something as leverage when you're already a part of the government now and it's not being fixed.
Well,
because you're thinking people are dumb.
Not only that, but the president doesn't legislate.
Mm-hmm.
Congress does,
yep.
Right? You can only pass so many executive laws before it becomes beyond your authority, and you need Congress to legislate. And this is the conversation I bring up to people who are all about, oh my God, you voted against women's rights. Well, no, I didn't, because nothing changed yesterday, November 4th, to November 5th, to November 6th. Nothing's changed. Roe was struck down 30 months ago, and I have been searching for, and I've reached out to both of my senators, asking them to send me the legislation they've proposed to protect a woman's right to choose federally. And I've gotten no responses. There's not been any legislation that I can find in the last 30 months that has been proposed, because they're going to use it at election time, hopefully to sway it, and then they'll just put it on the back burner, and they'll blame the other party as to why it's one way and not the other way. When realistically, you look at, they had the White House, they had the majority in the Senate, they have a very, very, very small minority in the House. But I guarantee you that some of those Republicans would have said, yeah, that makes sense, let's pass that, And it could be something as simple as, federally, no state can ban access to it. That's just like Roe. Every other state had their own rules, but federally it was protected because of Roe. Why don't they pass that now?
Mm-hmm.
That's all it takes. But if they do that, it puts it to bed. And politicians don't want to put hot button issues like that to bed.
No, and it keeps people divided, and it keeps everyone at war with each other.
And that's why I think that the Democrats are upset about Kamala Harris losing should be just as mad at their legislators, their federally elected legislators that represent them in D.C. Where's your legislation? Where is it? I want to see it. It should have come out day 1 or day 2 or week 3 or whatever. 30 months in, Laurie, 30 months in, nobody could present a bill to say, oh, this is what we had proposed and it wasn't agreed on because of these certain scenarios. You know? It's absolutely ridiculous. And it's
And
just like it's typical Washington BS. You look at the Inflation Reduction Act, didn't do anything but increase the size of government, right? What
mhm.
what what causes inflation? Government spending. And it's not necessarily the handouts. It's the new programs, new employees, new this, new that. That was the same issue with the border bill. Oh, they had a bipartisan bill to fix the border. It was called the border bill, but that was it. It had the smallest amount of funding. Still allowed for a flow of illegal migrants. Was talking about giving 10 million migrants, illegals, amnesty, which is not what our country is all about. And it certainly didn't go far enough to stop everything. But again, well, they voted against it because they wanted Trump to say, no, it was a bad piece of legislation. Adding border agents adds to the size of government. Those are employees who have payroll, pensions, health care, equipment, all of those things when it's such an easier fix.
Yeah, well, nobody wants to fix things either. And I think, like, going back to the topic that you just said about, like, one of the things that I found very interesting, actually, it infuriated me a little bit when Biden decided that he wasn't going to continue on.
You mean when he was pushed out after
Yes,
that? Yeah, after a
yeah,
horrific debate performance.
yeah. So first of all, during the, I think it was, if I'm correct, I think it was during the last election, whatever, when they were trying to discover which nominee was going to be the Democrat candidate. Nobody liked Kamala. In fact, she was the very first one, I believe, who was eliminated from the whole round.
In the 2020 elections,
Yeah.
yes. Yep.
So then, because she's VP, you just go, first of all, it made me so angry because I'm like, this is not how our Constitution works. They just appointed her. That was
Correct.
not chosen. And you didn't, because this whole bit about, like, oh, no one's ever going to let a woman be president. I don't, I don't buy that.
Yep.
I believe that if you have the right woman, that it will happen.
Absolutely.
It's just like when they said, oh, when they were using, like, the race thing and stuff. Um, People didn't care. They voted for Obama. They liked Obama, like twice. Yes.
Twice.
So that to me is irrelevant.
I voted for
You,
Obama twice.
I did too.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, like, if you have the right candidate, people will overlook those things that you keep saying are hindering points.
Right.
But they just went in and appointed her. And then everyone who didn't like her now all of a sudden was, like, loving her. And they used this whole tactic of the country's obsession with celebrities to get like them all to endorse her. I get on election day, I was looking at social media and I'm seeing, like, all these, like, celebrities out at the election polls, like, interacting and telling people to vote for this person, like, save her. And then, and I'm like, you're so out of touch. I'm like, first of all, I wouldn't vote for Kamala. I didn't like her, and I don't think that she should have been the VP pick either.
Right.
Sorry, I think there was much better and more qualified candidates than her. So when people are like, well, you're a woman, you should know. I will never vote for someone just because they're a woman. You know what? First of all, I look at any political figure.
Mm-hmm.
They're essentially two sides of the same coin. Okay, when you
Correct.
break it down,
Yep.
they just have different views on different things, but they're the same coin. And I will no longer, it's just like when I said, once I did my research and I started changing, my allegiance is no longer to the Democrats. It's no longer to
To
the
a party.
Republicans. It
Right.
is to the Constitution. It is to upholding those values and
Yeah.
to do what feels right for me. So
It,
don't try to guilt me into voting for a woman because I'm a woman.
right. And you honestly have to be objectionable too about your picks. Like I voted for Obama, and the very first thing, the real big thing that he had to deal with was the housing crisis,
Mhm.
and bailing out the big banks too big to fail. Did I like that? No, I hated that. It disgusted me. Do I understand why he had to do it? Yeah, because if you think about how society runs today, we're not we're not barterers. We're not exchanging goods and services. We're a cash type commerce. And if you had big banks, Bank of America, all these get locked up, yeah, great. Yeah, it's all your money is federally insured, but when do you have access to it? you're still going to need to pay your mortgage, buy your medication, buy gasoline, make your car payment, pay for automotive repairs. And so the too big to fail thing, yeah, I get it. I don't like that he did it, but I understand why he did it, because it would have been absolutely destructive to the everyday American, you know?
I do
And
think though that we need to get to a point where these too big to fail eventually though will fail, because uh,
oh,
it's not aligning with the people anymore. And I think there's so much greed, and I think we need to, and it also has like hindered like small businesses and people trying to get ahead,
yeah,
because you have too much of the commercial, like let them fail, just let them
yeah.
fail.
Well, that's the ethics and morality question that comes into play. And I know that, like, we'll take banks and lenders. I had a situation where a young person in my life applied for a vehicle loan and they got approved, but the interest rate was 28.5%. And I said, why would that automotive sales guy, knowing what he knows, and this person being decades younger than him, tell her that that was a good thing and he can get her into that vehicle? That's just disgusting,
Because he's
right?
going to profit off of it.
I know, but that's wrong. That's the wrong choice morally, right?
No,
Let
well,
let
ethically, you would think so, but if people aren't living from a place of integrity, Scott, they don't care.
right.
They'll profit off of people. They will put people in bad situations, knowing that they're basically giving them a deal with the devil.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll go back to the objection of, do I wish that Trump was a more polished spokesperson? Of course I do. Do I sometimes think he sounds like a blithering ass and he's just, yes, I do. But I also understand that he thinks the way I think about his vision for the country. And I believe that the majority of his people, the majority of his voters, revere the Constitution, and they just want things to be, quote unquote, right.
Mm-hmm.
DEI. I don't want the a black female transgender pilot. I want the best possible pilot that can fly the plane,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not about equality, because just life isn't equal.
Yep.
Everybody is born in this country today with the same amount of opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
regardless, right? It just
Yep.
takes some education and some effort.
Yep.
We've talked about this before. I was born in a family, single mom. My parents were divorced when I was very young. We grew up in public subsidized housing. I have a high school degree, but a high school diploma rather, and that's it. But everything else I've worked for. I mean, I've learned. Cut my teeth at the big orange box and learned that way. And now my lifestyle is such that I never thought it was not attainable, but I never thought I'd be able to attain it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
without a skill set or a trade or anything like that. And I was fortunate enough to use my intellectual power to get to where I am. And it's nobody's success story but mine, and it's nobody's failure but mine if I were to fail, you know?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's
So,
the important thing. Like, to we all make choices in this life,
yeah.
and I think we all have the same opportunities. I shared, I grew up poor myself, like Scott. When we were kids, like my dad, bless him, he worked multiple jobs to make sure that we had what we needed. Did we have everything we wanted? No, but we had what we
No,
needed.
that's it.
And I grew up in the projects, and I stayed there for many years of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad would get up go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then go to work till 5, and then go to his next job from 6 to midnight, and then come home and sleep for those 5 hours and get up and do it every day. And then he'd work landscaping jobs on the weekend. And I learned that value of hard work from my dad. And I learned not to take things for granted. I think one of the things that I think now though is that we indoctrinate people to think that if you can only be successful if you want to take out all these student loans and take all this debt on,
Correct.
and
Correct.
do this. No, like if I could go back and do things again, I would do like a trade or something, trade school, versus going to
Sure.
college and putting myself in debt. But that's my debt that I took on, and I'm okay with that. Like, I know that I have to pay that back. I know, but I think like we make choices in this life, and like there's consequences to every single choice that we make in this world. And I know that. And so I try to be like, okay, like I'm not going to overspend. I'm not going to overdo things. If I want something, sure, I may have to save for it. I may have to work a little harder. But
Right.
I'm no longer that dumb girl who was like, when I started making money, I was like, oh, well, now I'm going to get all these credit cards. And I did. When I finally got to the age where I was like credit card eligible, every
Mm-hmm.
single credit card company would give me a credit card. And I was so stupid, Scott. I mean, I would get paid and I would literally go sit in New York City and stay at the Waldorf Astoria and like live it up and spend all my money and then be like, okay, well, I got to go back to work for another week so I can have a high end weekend in New York City and do all this stuff. And I want the latest things and I want to buy this. But none of that material stuff is going to make you happy in life.
That's
And
correct.
you know what? At the end of the day, when we all leave here, you ain't taking none of it. So you know what? Now, like when I am like for me, I view money even differently. Like I view, okay, I work and I know that I have basic needs and necessities that I have to, I have to put a roof over my head. I have to do this stuff. But now, like if I give something to people or I buy something, I look at it and go, this isn't money for me. This is my time. And
Mm-hmm.
my time, I'm never getting that back. So if I look at something and it costs me $50, I'll be like, okay, this is like 2 hours of my time it took to make this money. So that's 2 hours of my life. Is this person worth me giving that money to? Is this item worth me giving up hours of my life to have?
That's incredible perspective. Yeah.
And it has changed how I look at everything. I no longer want, like for me, I see things. I had an experience on my last trip, and I started to see everything from a different perspective in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
I actually, it affected me in such a way that I kind of lost faith in everything because I was like, if everything, I was like, is everything I learned a lie? Is everything, like, and I had to really come to grips and go, okay, you need to see the truth. You need to see the different perspectives to this. And once I could understand and accept things, I got my faith back and I could feel that guidance that I needed. But I look at things from a different perspective. I've changed. Even in the last 6 months, I'm not the same person that I was.
Yeah.
And I look at that and I deeply think about things now, and it's so important. And so I look at as I just turned 40 this summer, I have a finite amount of time left. What am I going to use my money is my time. So
Mm-hmm.
what is worth giving my time of my life up for at this point?
Right.
What am I
That's
invested
huge.
in? Yep.
That's huge. I think that yeah, yeah. I mean, I find it as I get older too, like really making a conscious effort to just be less reactive emotionally was one of the
Mm-hmm.
things. I used to have like a hair trigger, and I too many times let it fly on my family and my kids, and I struggle with it, but it's something I consciously work on every single day because I know that I can be better, and I have to just learn to absorb information, process it, and then respond and not
Mm-hmm.
react. Right, and that's one of the biggest growing things that I've been part of. And I think that if the majority of Americans can do that more and more, and I know there are a lot of people on the right and a lot of people on the left that like to that enjoy the triggering and the poking and the needling and stuff like that, but that's not productive for anybody, right? I will kind of recap. I can't believe that there are some people that have excommunicated family members because of the way they voted, right? And it's not a religion. Like sometimes people are so hung up on religion that they're like, no, it's this way or that way, and you can't tell me anything different. Oh, okay, well, there's no really getting into you, but a political ideology or a vote, okay, well, help me understand why you voted for that because I thought you thought this way. They're like, well, I do. I do indeed think that you should have a right to access abortion as a woman. I didn't vote against that. I voted for better energy prices, national security, a secure southern border, somehow to stop the damn drugs from flowing in and killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. I don't want to hear Gavin Newsom from California telling me that, it's a great state and everybody in California is talking about, oh, the fifth largest economy in the world and this and that. But if you go to California and you physically look at it, with all due respect, it's kind of a shithole. trash on the freeways, tons of people, tons of homelessness. It's not the land of milk and honey if financial success was your measurement, right? Because yeah, they've got plenty of money, but boy, do they have a plenty of other stuff too, right? And it doesn't match up. It doesn't match up, and it goes back to the education. You know, I'm street smart. You're street smart. Do I have a college degree? No. Will I ever make the kind of money somebody college educated makes? Probably not. But you can't tell me that because you have a diploma and I don't, that you're morally superior to me. It's not the case, right? It's like you said, it's all about how you live your life and how you decide to make your choices and, what morality, whether it be religious or not, what morality, what compass do you follow, you know?
And that's
So,
important. It's important to look at things from that perspective, though, because at the end of the day, Scott, we're all one, and there's no one who's superior to anybody else. We're not inferior to anybody else. We're all
right.
equal. Just because someone makes more money or they have fame or they have this thing, like, it doesn't matter. It really, truly doesn't matter. For me, I look at everything from a love perspective now. Like um, my goal is I want to love everybody. I don't
Mm,
care about your background. I don't care about what you've done. I think that everybody is redeemable. Your past doesn't define who you are. If you're too focused on the future, you're not going to live presently. You're not going to be in those states.
correct.
That's where I am. And sure, if you vote one way or you vote the other, it doesn't mean that you align with every single value that that person has. And I
Right.
want to be very, very clear with that. You know what? Just because someone votes for, and I'll say it here, like, I did vote for Donald Trump this election,
Mm-hmm.
and no, I don't align with everything that he says. And like, one of the biggest things that came from me is, I also think that you do have to have people who are going to challenge Donald Trump, and that are going to have to. He got voted in because the American people need help, and they are looking for that. So he needs to honor those promises that he made to people.
Oh,
He needs
absolutely.
to he needs to be challenged. Like, I did not, and I'm glad that he is gone. His that Matt Gates, uh,
AG. Yeah.
I did not. I was like, absolutely not. Do not agree with this, and I hope that he does not get, like, I hope that does not go through, because
Mm-hmm.
there's a process of all these people. Just because Trump says, "Oh, this is the person I nominate," it doesn't mean that
Right.
that's the person that's going in.
Right.
And had very strong feelings about Matt Gates, and I think that he's got a lot of skeletons in his closet that he's trying to hide. That the reason, because people wanted stuff unsealed before they were going to allow that. And the minute that people started pushing back and wanting that, he stepped down. That guy's got a lot of skeletons in his closet, and that guy should not have any position of power whatsoever, because you can tell that he's someone who abuses it.
And
And
here's the
yep.
sad state of our affairs with politics. Those skeletons, the investigation, all it's been known for years,
Mm-hmm.
and it sat in the closet until something was decided, and then one side whipped it out. I'm like, what are we doing here? You know,
Yep.
this is why I make a huge argument for term limits too in Congress. I think that people shouldn't make careers out of it because nothing gets done. They learn how to work the system and win elections, and that's it.
They're just putting in things to make more money for their pocket, and that's
That's
all it
correct.
is.
That's correct.
I would say it's very hard pressed to find anyone who wants to be in any type of political area that wants to do things without some type of motive. And I will say, like, I love Chris because he actually wants to listen to people, and he's trying to, get involved and do things and educate people and help. And
Right.
he has integrity, and he
Yes.
he wants that. He doesn't care, and he'll tell you, like, himself, like, he's for the Constitution.
Yes.
And that's something that I respect. I respect the people who are going to put themselves out there, because it's not easy to put yourself in a situation where you're going to be in any type of political situation. You're going to be under a lot of scrutiny, no matter how low level or high level it is. People are going to scrutinize you. They're going to look for skeletons in your closet. They're going to pick you apart. They're going to attack you. They're going to, sometimes they're going to praise you. But if you're doing it because you genuinely want to make this world a better place for the people here, and to like have those values and keep those freedoms, I
Mm-hmm.
think that that speaks to a person. But what we have in the government is we have a bunch of people who have made it a career choice to profit as much as they can off the American people and
Correct.
pad their own pockets and not look out for our best interest. And that's
Yeah.
the problem that we've had. And that's why this election went the way it went.
Yeah. One of the things my father told me decades ago was politicians don't really learn how to govern or legislate. They learn how to win elections because that's all that matters. And I was
Yep.
blown away by that. That is stuck with me for a long time. So, real quick, I want to recap, but uh, earlier I was talking about my daughter and her friend is bisexual, not necessarily aligned with one particular sexuality or not, which is fine. She's not trans, she's a female, but she was really upset with my daughter voting the way she did and was concerned about the fact that, she was voting against her rights to marry the person she loves, live the life she wants to live. I don't necessarily see that happening. I don't believe Trump thinks that gays are evil and they need to be shut down. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact he's talked about supporting them and keeping them safe. But that said, I understood that this young lady was kind of important in our lives because she's like a kid to us, right? She's been around for a long time. And so I made a point when I saw her after the election to make a comment to her to let her know that, hey, look, I know your parents, your father's a staunch Republican, and they've tried to tell you that you're wrong the way you think, and it's not wrong. It's just different. I said, but I want to let you know, regardless of what the election results were, we love you. You're like a kid to us. So, whatever we can do to keep you safe is what we'll do. And I think that that's, like you said, you got to come from a place of love. And just because you vote one way or the other doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with that one side wholeheartedly, or it doesn't mean that the other side thinks that you voted this way because that's what the other side stands for, right? They didn't make an abortion thing an issue, but everybody's now flipping out saying all those women are going to lose their rights. So, to recap, there's a lot here. We could probably go on for 3 hours. The uh, the reaction is what I expected it to be. Like I said, I really think it's upsetting that a lot of people excommunicated family members out of the holidays and stuff because of the way they voted. It's just asinine. That's an opportunity for personal growth. You have to engage with those people that think different than you and understand why they think it. And then when you know it, whether you disagree or not, just let it alone, right? Let it alone. Family and friends are so much more important than politics, you know? So, and as a female, I'd love to get your perspective. I mean, I don't know if the last 30 months or so you felt that all your rights were going to be taken away, but again, something that it could be decided upon or it could be rectified, but it hasn't been. And that's a sad state for our country as well.
I, maybe like right after the election, I remember like seeing people's posts and they were like, if you voted this way, unfollow and unfriend me, and this is all on you. And I feel unsafe today waking up because of what, and I felt very confused. I was like, what rights have you lost today? And if you feel like you lost your rights today, maybe you should take it up with the current administration because everything's still the same
Right.
today as it was yesterday because the administration hasn't even changed. But honestly, I don't feel as a woman, maybe it's just because of the way that I choose to live my life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like I am losing anything. I don't feel like I'm, that this is going to like change my whole entire world.
Mm.
Um, I I look at it from a very different perspective because I still love the same people that I loved prior. I still, I can still look at things from a different perspective. I am looking at everything from a perspective of like from my perspective that the people who did vote a specific way that they're going to hold Trump accountable.
Sure.
And I also think that there's a huge difference this election too. Last election, like Trump was awful. Like he wouldn't stop, like with the rhetoric and the mouth and the. I think even he's changed from my own perspective of looking at it. And I think that he does want to honor those things because he sees people struggling. I don't think that he's coming into uh you know degrade women, to make it an unsafe world for gays, lesbians, bis, whatever you are. I don't see that, because first of all, it's the people behind it. And I think it's Delaware, the senator who is just got elected, and she's a trans woman.
Yeah.
And she said her community's been great. And I remember listening to something with her on The View, and they were like, oh, well, you're the first like trans woman's coming in. And she's like, I'm not here to be an advocate for that. I'm here to
Advocate for the people of
advocate for
Delaware.
the people in my state who need me and who
That's,
count on me.
yeah.
And I think that this is what we need to start looking at in the world. We need to stop trying to put everyone into these pockets, because this is why people are like, oh, you're unsafe and this is all on you. And no, we need to start looking at each other as human beings and looking at the struggles that we're all having, loving each other, accepting each other for who we are.
Yes.
And until we do that, I don't care. Like, I don't feel any, I mean, I feel unsafer with all the stuff that's going on in the world. I think it's getting more violent because people don't want to listen to everyone else. Sure, I do agree with that perspective, but I don't feel that changing the administration, I would probably say, like, in the world, I think the world's a little bit more unsafe in the current administration that we have than I felt prior. But I don't feel like I'm losing anything as a woman. And I think that as women, that all that we have to do is we have to, if we feel like something's not right, speak up, go to your senators, go to your people. And if those people aren't working on your behalf and they're not following what you align with and stuff, then hold them accountable. Go to your city meetings, write to your senators. And if they're not, vote them out.
Correct.
And that's not just for women, that's for anyone. If those people are not aligning with you and not upholding the values and not upholding the promises that they make, get them out.
Or standing behind what they say. Like Maggie Hassan was all about campaigning on her last reelection when she beat Tom Bolduc to protect women's rights to choose. And so when I emailed my senator, both of them, Jean Shaheen and Maggie Hassan, to say, I'd love to see your legislation on this. Not a thing. I'm like, so you're not going to address it. I can't get to you because I'm a small little pebble in the cog that is the federal government. But that's one of those things that people need to think about when it comes time for reelection, is like, well, you really didn't do anything. You just talked about it. But we're all so influential and or influenced by current times and stuff. I think it's tough to see. Real quick, though, back on the Trump, I don't think he's a Bible-thumping, God-loving man, but I do think that being shot at would probably change anybody. I think that was a huge eye-opener for him, personally.
And I think, too, Scott, I think it's I think that we all need to be more mindful of what we consume and what we understand, and looking at things, because one of the misinformation things that I saw that I will point out is when people were talking about when they showed the election map, and they were like, notice how every state that voted for Kamala didn't have there's no voter ID requirements or whatever.
Right.
And I want to point out misinformation right there, because New Hampshire was a state that ended up going to Kamala.
Correct.
And they have very strict voter ID. Like, you have to have IDs, you have to have everything. And they're actually making it even harder to register coming up in the new year. So that was complete misinformation that people are putting out there, that all these states don't require like voter ID requirements. Because I know New Hampshire absolutely does, and New Hampshire did end up speaking, and they, like, the majority voted for Kamala.
Yes. Yeah. And voter ID isn't racist, nor is it oppressive, because voter IDs are free in every state, 50 states. Yeah. It's just, there's so much. We can go on for hours and hours, days probably, but it's been a little over an hour. I appreciate your time too. This was awesome. I was so looking forward to it. I kind of thought I understood your perspective, but I'm trying to get people that don't think like I do to engage. And as soon as I try, they shut down. They don't. When I ask a Democrat or a very far left leaning liberal, when does a fetus not become a fetus? Like, when does it become a baby? And then somebody on social media yesterday actually said, well, about 22 weeks. I said, there you go. It's viability. I said, so you have limits. No response after that. Like, what we were getting close to common ground, but I think maybe did it scare that person? Because we had a couple of exchanges, and then all of a sudden, as soon as I said, oh, so you do have a limit, did they think, I'm thinking the wrong way and I can't respond to this? Like, is that like a secret? You're not supposed to talk about, yeah, 20 weeks is pretty far. That's halfway.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I would say this has been my experience. Social media, I don't think is a great, but I think it's everyone shares their perspective, but
Right.
I don't think it's a place to start to have the conversations. I think the best thing to do to have conversations with people with different perspectives was exactly what you did prior, when you went and stood outside and you put yourself out there because you
Mm-hmm.
knew that there could be people who are going to walk up to you and have a different perspective. But I found, I want to have those conversations because I think that those conversations with people who disagree with you are more powerful than sitting and having an echo chamber conversation. And I think they're going to
Correct.
affect more
Correct.
people
We're
because
tweeting things, and yeah.
yep, we need to get people into that middle ground where we can love each other, we can respect each other, but we can have different thoughts and opinions. And it doesn't sway how we view a human being as a person
Mm-hmm.
based on how they vote, what their religion is, all these different perspectives. It needs to be there. So I find for myself, I have been blessed to have like people who will, and I will say this: if you come at me and you're disrespectful, I will not engage with you.
Right. No
There is
hostility.
there's a respectful way to engage with me and to say, hey, I don't agree with you, or hey, I feel that you're being, your perspective here is not correct, or I feel that you're being hypocritical. Call me out on it anytime, and I will have those conversations with you because I want to understand where you look at my perspective, because
Mm-hmm.
truth is subjective perspective. Like when we're talking as an individual, we all have different subjective perspectives, so the truth looks different for every single person. It's
That's
not
so right.
the truth.
Right.
It's a subjective perspective. So I want to engage with people, and I have the best conversations. Sure, I have like wonderful conversations with people who do agree with me, and they've helped me grow and learn. But I also have those really incredible conversations, and those are the conversations I want to have in public with people. I want to have those conversations where we can say, thank you for giving me your perspective. I do not agree with what you said, even after having our conversation, but I respect your thoughts and your opinion and why you come from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think until we can have those conversations together publicly and in person, we're not going to change anything online because
Yeah.
it's just a bickering cage.
I can't disagree with that. I can't disagree with it. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome.
Thank you so much for this, Scott. Do you have
This is
any
great.
other questions or anything that you wanted? I know you had wanted to have that,
I
so I'm grateful for this.
we could go on and on. I mean, again, it's just we could probably put into compartments individual topics. Tariffs and plans, and I just so much, like you talked about, hypocrisy from both sides, and there's obviously more conversation for the future. I think we should probably look at scheduling another session. Maybe include our
Absolutely.
friend, the alderman in Nashua too.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have a conversation with the both of you. So
That's awesome. Thank you,
thank you
Laurie.
so much, Scott.
All right, take care. It's good seeing you.
You too.
Bye.